My name is Chris Powney, and I'm delighted to be moderating this session this afternoon entitled Building a Sustainable Business Travel Program. I also have to say, just echoing the comments from Catherine a little bit earlier on for GBTA, first of all, thank you so much to the Arabian Travel Market and GBTA for inviting us to come and present on this fascinating topic. And also from a personal perspective, it's just wonderful to be back with real people. And it's just fantastic to be here with friends and industry colleagues and having proper conversations, and I'm sure everybody agrees with that too. So this is going to be a wonderful session to hopefully end your day. So our topic this afternoon then is on building a sustainable business travel program. And it's funny because 12 months ago it was all about the C word, and I haven't heard the C word. I haven't heard COVID. Goodness, I've said it now. But I haven't heard COVID mentioned almost at all over the last couple of days. But I've heard the word sustainability mentioned 1,000 times. And this, I have to say, is one of the most important topics that we're working on now globally within industry and particularly within the business travel industry. And it's my pleasure to be involved in this session today along with our esteemed panel. So what does that mean? So first of all, many of you will be familiar with the term ESG, environmental, social and governance, which is the kind of broader frame, if you like, for this topic. We are going to be focusing just on the environmental piece of this today. Inevitably, we might touch on some of the societal and some of the governance pieces, but we are going to try and focus very much on the environmental sustainability discussion. We're also going to try and focus on business travel and all that means, and obviously leisure travel plays a massive part in what happens here in this region, in this market, but we're going to try and bring it back into the business travel space. And we're going to look at what companies are doing, what companies are expecting with regards to sustainability. And we're going to talk about how in business travel, people can and must incorporate sustainability into their corporate travel programs. And we're hopefully going to leave everybody with some fantastic ideas, some fantastic recommendations on what they can go back with and implement and discuss within their own businesses. So that's what we're looking to do. It's not about me, though. I'm not going to be speaking. My job is purely to moderate a fantastic panel of industry leaders. And I'm delighted to introduce them to you now. So hopefully on the line and dialing in virtually, we have our colleague Julien. Is Julien on the line? So Julien Echanchu, who's the Sustainability Director for Advito based in France. Also delighted to introduce Fatima. So Fatima Jafar Al-Safari is the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Bahrain Tourism Authority. So delighted and welcome Fatima for joining. We also have Martin Drew, and Martin is an SVP, Senior Vice President of Sales and Cargo for Etihad Airlines. So thank you so much for joining. And then last but not least, we have David Todd, who's with the Intercontinental Hotel Group, IHG. So we'll have the opportunity to speak to our in-person panelists in a short time, but the first thing I want to do is hand over to Julien on the line. So Julien, thank you so much for joining. It's wonderful to see you. And Julien's going to talk us through and really give some positioning thoughts on how this means within the travel industry as a whole. So if I can hand it over to you, Julien, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Chris, and hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I have my voice a bit broken, sorry about that. So my name is Julien Echanchu, and I'm leading the sustainability practice by Advito. Advito being the consulting arm of BCD Travel. So my daily job is to explain large corporations how they can decrease the environmental impact of their business travel. So let me share my screen, and I hope this will work.
Fantastic. We can see that, Julien. Thank you.
Yes, good mode? Okay. Before asking how we can build a sustainable business travel program, I think it's important to ask about the impact of business travel. Because when we talk about business travel, as you may know, the major impact of business travel comes from air travel. Okay, depending on the client, on the corporation, it's, I would say, 80 to 95% of business travel emissions come from air. Does it mean that other categories do not matter? No, definitely not. If we take hotel, for example, yes, there is a small impact when we talk about CO2, but sustainability is not only about CO2. And hotel can have a major impact around biodiversity protection. What they do around food sourcing, about water conservation can have a huge impact. Second example about car, for example, if you explain your travelers which kind of car they should choose, electrical, hybrid, etc., it may have an impact for your business travel emissions, but also in your employees' personal life. So your impact can be much bigger.
Julien, can I just stop you 1 second? I'm sorry. Could
Sure.
you look to go on to presenter view on the screen, please? I think we've got your next slide coming up as well. I wonder if there's
okay.
I wonder if there's another view we can have. It will be fine, but it could be better. That's all.
Could be better. Okay, let me try. I'm not 100% sure that I can. Yeah, is it slightly better? I cannot go in full mode. I think I don't have the...
I think that's much better. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So air is the biggest impact, but you may have heard that air is just a small part of CO2 emissions worldwide. You may have heard 2%. The real figure is 4%, not 2%, because we have to take into account what we call relative forcing, so the non-CO2 effect. Still, you may wonder, you may say, but after all, why bother for just 4% of the emissions, which after all is a small figure. In itself, it doesn't sound big, but think about it that way. It's more than the emissions of countries like UK, Mexico, or Brazil, so it's still significant. If we continue to grow as IATA plans, the air travel will be responsible for 25% of emissions in 2050, which will be much more significant. There is also an idea around social justice, because 90% of people on Earth never fly. So another figure for you, 1% of people on Earth are responsible for 50% of air emissions. And last but not least, it's not an argument to say I have just a small part, so I do not need to act, because in the end, there is no industry, no sector which is responsible for a huge part of the emissions worldwide. This does not exist. So if you tell the director of a coal plant in Germany or in China that they have to reduce their emissions, they may say, oh, but wait, my coal plant is just responsible for 0.1% of the emissions worldwide, so why should I care? No, we all have to act. Business travel and air travel have to act, not more than other sectors, but not less either. So, in order to build a good sustainable travel program, we recommend a four-steps approach in that order. So first, understand and measure your impact and set targets. Second, travel less, and I'm aware it's quite a strong message I have today. It's, I would say, a courageous position that we have by Advito, and also more and more by organizations like GPTA. We cannot reach our climate goal just by traveling better and by buying SAF and offsets. That's very important, of course, but that will not be enough. At some point, we will have to think about reducing travel. Of course, I don't want a world with no flights. Business travel is necessary and will remain necessary, or even crucial. We've seen that with the vaccines during the pandemic. However, some trips can probably be skipped. So travel less, travel better, shift to better modes of transportation, take more the train, take better aircraft. Taking a good aircraft can make a significant difference. And last thing, offsets. I would say, I have a word on that later, but let's be careful on offsetting, which very often do not work, so we have to be very careful on how we do offsetting. Talking about the targets that we should have, I think it's important to mention that the priority should be to decrease emissions and not to be net zero or carbon neutral. And I think it's a very strong requirement, very new actually, from the science-based target and from all climate scientists, that they say basically that we cannot be carbon neutral or net zero today. That's not possible. And I'm happy they did that, because we've seen in the past years that many companies, organizations have said, okay, I can increase my emissions because I offset, and after all good because I'm carbon neutral. And in that sense, offsetting has sometimes been used as an excuse not to act. And that's why I like this statement from the science-based target, who says no net zero claim until long-term targets are met. So they say that first we should decrease emissions, divide them by 2 by 2030, and then, and only then, if we offset the rest, we can be carbon neutral. Okay, and I think that's a very strong statement from the science-based target that we should all follow. So priority, reduce emissions. When we say reduce emissions, what do we talk about exactly? So if we follow what climate scientists say, and you may have read that in the last IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they say that we have to divide our emissions by 2 by 2030 to keep global warming below 1.5 degree. That's a decrease of 5 to 6% per year, every year. Okay. And talking about those 1.5 and 2 degree, because I see quite a lot of confusion today around that. So there is actually a huge gap between 1.5 and 2 degree. Today, the global warming is at 1.2 degrees Celsius versus pre-industrial era, 1.2. And we see today, while I'm speaking, huge heat waves in India and in Pakistan. So climate change and global warming is already there just by 1.2 degree. So the gap between 1.5 and 2 is huge, actually. So if we miss the target of 1.5, we should target 1.51 and not 2. Okay, so the 1.5 is really something crucial. So again, priority is to reduce by traveling less. That's quite obvious how to do it. Traveling better. What does traveling better mean? You can have a huge impact by choosing the right aircraft. Concrete example between London and New York. So I didn't put the name of the airlines, but some airlines are operated with very efficient aircraft. Example, the A350, and some others are operating with non-efficient, for example, B747 or A380, and the gap between both is really significant. So between a good aircraft and a new aircraft on this route, you can save 1 ton of CO2. And 1 ton of CO2, if that does not speak to you, that's really a lot. That's just to give you an order of magnitude. That's the equivalent of you driving 20 kilometers per day, every day for 1 year. And that just with one trip. So by choosing the right aircraft, you can have a significant impact on your business travel emissions. Choosing the right aircraft, the second biggest leverage you have is probably the train. So of course you cannot take the train everywhere. If you want to go to the US, it will be a bit complex. However, on some regions, it's highly efficient, sometimes also cheaper, so it's not always, doesn't always cost more to be more sustainable. So you have opportunities in the East Coast in the US. In Europe, as you can see on the map, you have a huge network. And last but not least, in China. And this is very often not known by corporates, but China has by far the biggest high-speed rail network in the world. Okay, so by traveling better, by choosing right aircraft, shifting more to rail. I didn't speak about hotel, but moving to eco-certified hotels, for example, can make a significant difference. Remember the story: travel less, travel better, and offset your emissions. So again, I would have a strong message for you here. Really be careful around this offsetting. I'm sorry to tell you that 85% of offsetting projects do not work. I'm not saying that according to a study from the European Union. In some occasions, it can even be worse than doing nothing. I insist on that. So, because if you finance a cheap project, this can lead to planting just one species of tree, for example, monoculture, disaster for biodiversity, etc. So be careful when you choose your offsetting project. A good way is often to look at how much does it cost. When you offset at $1 per ton of CO2, that pretty much cannot be a good project. So a good project should be at a high carbon price, and it's a paradox, not necessarily focused on CO2. So the priority of a good reforestation project, for example, should be around protecting biodiversity, water conservation, empowerment of local population. And if all that works well, then the co-benefit is the CO2. But this race to CO2 can sometimes be dangerous and even, to some extent, harm the environment. So be careful when choosing your offsetting project. So clearly there are leverages to be more sustainable. You can also wonder, something we hear a lot, what can you hope from technology in the industry, in technology improvement, new aircraft, SAF, etc. So here also, don't take me wrong, technology will be necessary and will be crucial. However, be careful, it will not solve all our issues, I would say. And for that, I like talking about what we call the Jevons paradox, which is also known as the rebound effect. So in this graph, you have two curves, one decreasing and one increasing. The decreasing curve shows the carbon intensity of the airline sector over the past 30 years. So when the airlines say that they have improved a lot their efficiency, that's true actually. They have improved a lot. So per passenger, the emissions are much lower than 30 years ago, 2 or 3 times lower. Huge improvement in the technology. Unfortunately, at the same time, the traffic has increased so much that the absolute emissions, which are the only ones that matter when we talk about climate change, absolute emissions have increased a lot during the same period. So when we say that technology improvement decreases emissions, history has rather shown that it's the opposite. It's the opposite, because you become more efficient, so you need less fuel. So with the same quantity of fuel, you can carry more passengers and use more aircraft. So that's a bit the danger with technology improvement. And now let's finish with the breakthrough that we are all waiting for in the industry, starting with SAF. So we hear a lot about SAF, so sustainable aviation fuel, which are either biofuel, so made of waste, for example, waste, used cooking oil, or municipal waste, for example. And you have synthetic fuel, so made out of carbon and oxygen that we take from and hydrogen that we take from the atmosphere, for example. So again, don't take me wrong, SAF will be necessary in our travel to decarbonization. However, again, it will be a very small part of the solution. SAF, in the best case scenario, very optimistic, will fulfill 5% of the industry needs in 2030. Today, it's 0.01%. Within 10 years, 5% in the best case scenario, and again, as I said, we need to decrease by 50%. So let's all be careful around all the communication around SAF. Yes, it will be necessary, but the day when SAF will replace all our fossil fuel, this day will never happen, because even after 2030, we need to move to synthetic fuel, because we will not have enough biofuel according to SAF producers. Synthetic fuel require huge quantities of energy that itself needs to be clean, so renewable or nuclear. And again, according to scientists, it's very unlikely that we'll be able to produce huge quantities of synthetic fuel. And I encourage you, each time we all hear about the technological breakthrough, to think about the energy required beyond the technology. Think about the energy. That's the same story with electrical and hydrogen aircraft. They will come, I have no doubt around that, but first, not before 2035, and again, the emergency is now. And second, think about that. Let's suppose that all aircrafts, just in Paris, all aircraft are electrical tomorrow, no technological issues, etc. Then we need 10 new nuclear plants to be built. So we need to build 10 new nuclear plants and dedicate them to the aircrafts of CDG. Okay, so it's not possible, it will not be possible to continue with the current volume of flight and to feed them with electricity or hydrogen. But even if this solves just 1 or 2% of the issue, that's great. So again, don't take me wrong, we will need technology, we will need SAF, but it's quite unlikely that they will be a big part of the solution. But it's already great if they can be a small part of the solution. So that's it for me. I sometimes, when I have this kind of speech, people find that I'm pessimistic. I'm not at all. I'm very optimistic for the industry. However, we have to find a new model and to be serious on the sustainability topic. We will need technology. We will need better aircrafts. We will need to travel better. But at some extent, we also have to question the continuous growth of the sector. And I'm sure that if we do that in the right way, our industry can thrive again. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Julian, thank you very much. That was fantastic. Thank you. Wonderful. I'm sure many people will have questions. There will be an opportunity in a short while to ask questions of any of the panelists. But Julian, that's fantastic. What we wanted to do was to get your experience and to give that broad overview as to what's going on. I didn't think that was pessimistic at all. I think that was a fantastic presentation, some really good stuff to feed upon now and to build upon. So I'm going to take a seat. Perhaps if I can start with Fatima. So Fatima, I've asked each of my panelists to first of all bring to life your role, Fatima, because I'm conscious I didn't do it justice. So just spend a few seconds just telling us a little bit more about what you do. And then for each of our panelists, it will be wonderful just to hear about what are you doing in your industry? What is your sector doing? What have you heard from Julien there that's resonated with each of you to what you're doing? So Fatima, if I can start with yourself, thank you so much. Okay. Could we just have the microphone up here, please? There you go. Good.
Thank you, Chris. And I believe that having Julien join us today virtually is a testament to where companies and entities have evolved in terms of employing environmental sustainability into their business travel programs. And just to give you a bit of a brief about my role in the Bahrain Tourism and Exhibitions Authority, I currently hold the role of the Deputy CEO, and one of our main mandates is to promote the Kingdom of Bahrain as a preferred tourism destination internationally as well as regionally. And obviously we also promote exhibitions, and we are creating for Bahrain a regional MICE hub that I will talk about in a more comprehensive way during the seminar. So just to build on a few points that Julien has mentioned in his presentation, I do believe, and I voice out the concern of many people, that yes, business travel is very important in our industry. And it's important for many reasons. It's important for networking. It's important for building business opportunities. So business travel will always be here to stay. But having said that, let's face it, entities that have a huge business travel component also have a huge commitment and also create a carbon footprint for themselves. And I think that more and more entities are really investing into becoming more environmentally cautious, and they're really investing in terms of being more carbon conscious as well. Having said that, I think that the more governments realize what is the impact of environmental sustainability, the more they will realize that it is crucial for them to adopt those technologies or those strategies in their travel programs. Let's face it, at the end of the day, combating climate change is not something nice to have, it's essential. So just to give you an example of one of the Kingdom of Bahrain's success stories in that angle. So very recently, we had one of our most successful F1 events in Bahrain that happened in March. And we were very pleased to note that during the Formula One, our international visitors increased by 50% compared to 2019. And in 2019, tourism was booming. And one of the main reasons for that is because a lot of the non-essential business travel did not happen this year. And the reason for that is that the Kingdom of Bahrain developed a lot of technology that allowed clients and visitors and participants to actually do the pre-organization phase of one of the most important events in the Formula One virtually rather than be on the ground in Bahrain. So obviously that was more cost effective, and that also created a very positive platform for people to actually come and enjoy the event rather than invest money into the pre-organization travels and non-essential travels of the event. So I really believe that the more and more governments and entities realize how important it is to invest in environmental sustainable technology in their business travel programs, the more that we will all become more carbon savvy when it comes to our travel programs.
Okay, fantastic, Fatima. That was a wonderful overview as to what you're doing in Bahrain, so thank you so much. Martin, if I can come to yourself then, please. So first of all, just a quick overview for everybody as to your role, and then And I got a heads up on this because I was on your stand yesterday, so I've seen some of the great stuff that you're doing, but it would be wonderful to hear about your perspective on this topic.
Certainly, Chris. So, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so my role with Etihad, I am responsible for global sales, so all of passenger sales, as well as cargo. I've actually been with the airline for 17 years. The airline has only been in existence for just over 18 years, so I'm sort of old school in Etihad terms. But Chris, to your point, as relates to sustainability at Etihad, you know, this is something that's been at the top of our agenda for some time, and certainly, you know, will continue to be. I think, you know, many airlines, as Julien sort of outlined, you know, we look at what I actually thought it was 2% in terms of what the aviation industry sort of contributed in terms of CO2 emissions. I didn't realize it was 4%, but as Julien said, based on the current growth rate, that is obviously going to increase to, I think, in 2050 up to 25%. So, you know, this is an incredibly important topic, and I think in the aviation industry is something we have to take very seriously. Certainly at Etihad, as I said, it's been very high on our agenda for some time now. I think during COVID, you could understand why maybe airlines sort of, you know, put sustainability a little bit on the back burner because obviously it was just focused on survival, trying to get through COVID. But for us, it remained top of the agenda. And Chris, as you said, you know, we have many different sort of initiatives. We're very fortunate in that, as Julien mentioned, in terms of, you know, what's key is the fleet type that you're operating. Core aircraft within our fleet are the 787s, the Dreamliners, the -9s, -10s, and then just last month we introduced the A350-1000s into the fleet as well. So we have a very, very efficient fleet. The 787 is made up of 50% composite material, incredibly fuel-efficient engines. The 350s are made up of 70% composite material. So that's a good starting point for us, having a very efficient fleet. And you know, what we also have from a sustainability perspective is we have 2 aircraft within those different types. We have the Greenliner, the 787, which is basically dedicated to various sustainability sort of initiatives we have. And now what we've just introduced on the 350 side is an aircraft we call the Sustainability 50. And again, these are aircraft that we use specifically for sustainability initiatives. We operate eco flights where we have sort of SAF blended fuel. We minimize the use of single-use plastics. As an example, we actually operated an eco flight back in October of last year, which had a 35% mix of SAF. That flight actually, the carbon footprint on that flight was actually, the emissions were 76% lower than the same flight that we operated in 2019. So some of the advances that are being made are pretty incredible. From a SAF perspective, again, as Julien sort of outlined, it's tough to procure. There's not an awful lot being produced. It's very expensive. It's about 2 to 3 times the cost of standard Jet A1 fuel. So, of course, collectively, we need to grow demand for SAF, and that will then improve production and bring down the cost. I think when we talk about specifically as relates to business travel, corporate travel, something that we've developed recently, and we actually launched during Abu Dhabi's Sustainability Week back in January, is building on what we've offered through our Etihad Guest program, which is our loyalty program, which is Conscious Choices by Etihad Guests, where we give our guest members the ability to use their miles against various offset programs. Through our reward shop as well, they can buy sustainable products. We wanted to build on that and to come up with a corporate offering. So we've now, in January, we launched Corporate Conscious Choices. So basically, there's 4 pillars to Corporate Conscious Choices. So we give the corporate the ability to bulk buy SAF. So that's then fully accredited, goes towards the corporate Scope 3 emissions targets. We also have now launched the Green Surcharge. So what we do is we apply a nominal surcharge to every ticket sold. That surcharge then creates a fund. That fund can then be used against various offset programs. In addition to that, we've got the Green Loyalty program as well, where we'll actually award the corporate themselves, the actual company, with miles, which can be converted to cash and used against offset programs. And then on top of that, we have sort of offsetting sort of solutions as well that are. So there's a whole array of products that we're now using that have been incredibly well received by our corporate partners. And I think, from our perspective, I think we see ourselves as sort of thought leaders in this space from an airline perspective. And it's something that's, as I said, it's very much top of the agenda, and there's a lot of great stuff that's going on.
Okay, fantastic. David, thank you very much. So David, over to yourself. Sorry, Martin, thank you. David, over to yourself from a hotel perspective. What are you seeing within the hotel sector?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, my name is David Todds. I'm the Head of Operations for Middle East and Africa. I think, first of all, I'd like to start by saying that business travel was key to our resilience through the pandemic. Particularly throughout the region, we saw a lot of consultancy work, a lot of contractor work, and we're starting to see a lot of international travel pick up again in KSA and the UAE. Also, coming here to ATM, where we understood there was something supposed to be like 20,000 participants, certainly been more than that coming here over the course of the last 3 days, and there's still a lot of hive of activity. So this is extremely encouraging. We're also seeing governments, KSA, UAE and Qatar also looking to diversify and create demand in their own regions. We've come out of a buoyant expo where we saw in IHG in particular across the board occupancies at 80% and average rates above 2019 by 10 to 15%. Also with KSA Vision 2030, we're seeing a lot of business travel continuing to come through into the market through project work, consultancy work as they drive a change in the kingdom. And of course we have FIFA coming up in Qatar, which is also bringing in and attracting new demands to the market. What we're hearing from our guests is clearly there's a real focus on cleanliness, travel well-being, loyalty, flexibility, you mentioned earlier, but also sustainability. And this is coming out through very much IHG has IHG 2030 Journey to Tomorrow. And what we're seeing is that corporate and leisure guests are paying more attention to how a hotel operates. And they're particularly looking at the carbon footprint, they're looking at the sustainability, and they're looking at how they support local communities. We did a study in IHG, a global study, where 83% of our customers would choose to stay in a sustainable hotel. And out of that 83%, 31% would pay more knowing that a hotel was more sustainable than a competitor. We're also seeing partners such as search engines and OTAs, such as Booking.com and Google. They're starting to certify hotel as green hotels. So that's extremely encouraging. Now, IHG's Journey to Tomorrow 2030 is all about people, planet, and communities. So it's all about how we empower our colleagues, how we work with our industry peers, how we work with our owners, and how we help to shape the future together. And what's really important and what we're hearing more of is how do we measure that? So within IHG, we have a program that has been going on now for 10 years called IHG Green Engage, where each hotel needs to monitor their energy, their waste, their water consumption on a monthly basis. In addition to that, we've now partnered with Schneider Electric, who now, off property, will then give us the reports so that we can really go out to the market and be very clear on how sustainable we are as a company.
Fatima, I wanted to perhaps start with yourself, if I may, and it's kind of what we're living here, as in we have Julienne on the line, we have our own hybrid event here, we have people dialing in from, I'm sure, all around the world. Is that something that you're seeing as a move within the meetings and events industry, and how are you embracing that within Bahrain?
Absolutely, Chris. And if you allow me to just tap into for a moment a very important concept that Julian had in his presentation, which is the concept of social justice. So as many of you know, Bahrain is currently going to have, by the end of this year, one of the biggest exhibition centers in the region. And it's really going to be a game changer in terms of positioning Bahrain as a MICE hub, not just regionally, but internationally as well. And one of the key components that will make us a MICE hub is the adaptation of high state-of-the-art technology in this new convention and exhibition center. And the main reason for that is just what Julian mentioned, which is social justice. Let's face it, at the end of the day, not everyone can afford travel. So in the Kingdom of Bahrain, we made sure that this is accessible to business travelers. we created a platform in this exhibition center for hybrid events. We wanted more people around the world to be part of that business travel community, even though it could be virtually. And I think that's an important concept that many governments should adopt, because at the end of the day, you want more people to join into the conversation, and you want more people to join in global travel events, whether it's physically or virtually. So I really believe that we have embraced that, and at the end of the day, I know that a lot of people have suffered tremendously from COVID, but to me, I think that COVID-19 did provide a silver lining in some sense. I think that COVID-19 really had us at the forefront of being more resilient in the travel and tourism industry. And it made many travel industry experts and many entities and many governments think about ways to become more resilient and also create more opportunities for other business travelers to join into the conversation and to be part of that community initiatives.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Fatima. David, have you got anything to add
Yeah,
to that?
I was actually just going to build on something Fatima mentioned earlier, and that was the element of reducing carbon footprint for pre-planning of events. What we're seeing is using tools, that much as you did for Formula One, is that many people can now go onto the website, go onto our properties, look at the setup of the exhibition space. They can pre-plan it, they lay out through Zoom and 360. They can try and work out what the room is going to look like, how the look and feel, engage with our vendors before even setting foot in property for the event. So I completely agree with this. I think technology plays a big part in how we evolve and how we transition as we go through this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to look to bring Julian back on screen if we can, because I have a question for Julian, and very much building on something that David said a little bit earlier on. So I always find it fascinating when different ideologies or different projects it's like kind of clash and come together. And one of the things I often see is that in organizations, particularly in procurement departments, which is where I'm from, we're often driven and targeted perhaps on savings, although I would argue it's more value than savings, but there we go. But there is a perception certainly that actually a more sustainable option is often a more expensive option. And I just wanted to kind of throw that to Julian, if we can get Julian back on the line, to really say, you know, is he seeing that? Are we seeing that as an industry? And how are buyers reacting to that? But just while we're waiting for Julian, is anybody on the panel?
To answer that first, Chris, I think similar to what David said in terms of the survey that had done at Intercons, we did something similar when we were developing corporate conscious choices. We went out and surveyed over 500 of our corporate partners, global, local corporate partners, really to try and gauge, you know, what do they want in terms of their travel agreements, the elements, the sustainability elements within that. And we asked the question specifically, you know, would you be willing to pay more for this? And that's how we then came up with the green surcharge and other elements. And yeah, the over 25% actually came back saying they would pay up to 5% more in terms of, you know, in order to help achieve their sustainability sort of goals. So there's definitely appetite there. And and yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, sort of usually from a procurement standpoint, it's about just keeping the cost to an absolute minimum. But I think that there is that realization that, of course, change does cost sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as I said, yeah, it was interesting to see that sort of feedback from our corporates.
Fantastic, I love that. And Julian, from your perspective, how would you respond to that?
Yes, a good question. That I often hear that from my clients, like, yeah, but it will cost me more if I'm more sustainable. I have quite an easy answer. No, it will never cost you more to have a good sustainable travel program, never. Because again, if you are serious on the topic and you want to reach the climate goals as set by a scientist, you will have to travel less. And by traveling just a bit less, you will save so much money that it will more than compensate for the rest. And if we talk about the rest, I also challenge the idea that being more sustainable means paying more. If you take the train, for example, that's often cheaper than taking a flight. If you take more direct flight, yes, it will cost you more. But it's not always the case when we think about other categories. And one important point on that, and I really believe in that, and I strongly encourage all my clients to do that, is to start thinking about carbon pricing, because at some point, yes, you may have to arbitrate between CO2 and cost. And a good way to do that is to start giving a price to the carbon. You say airline A is cheaper than airline B, yet, but wait, airline A has a very bad aircraft, so it's 2 tons of CO2 more. And if you say 1 ton of CO2 is $100, then you calculate a new KPI, which is total cost of travel, being the addition of classical price plus environmental impact or externalities, and then you will see that airline A is more expensive. Or, I don't know, Marriott is more expensive than this Hilton. Okay, but this Marriott hotel has only renewable energy. Okay, so you will consume much less CO2, and these externalities, this environmental impact and social impact also, has to be taken into account in the calculation. It's not something we do, even at a global level. The way we calculate GDP is a bit outdated from my perspective. We should include those environmental and social aspects in the discussion.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Julian. And we have a question from one of our delegates on the floor, so. And hopefully, can we turn the mic on, please? Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask almost the same question, but let me change it to Mr. Martin. I'm from the airline side. I work for Turkish Airlines, and I'm managing the corporate accounts as well as the corporate TMC relations. When it comes to the pricing, during the COVID, we were trying to find the spot to park our aircraft. So right now, the demand is amazing, and we do not have enough aircraft to supply that demand. And of course, that has an effect on pricing. If we add additional, dollars or euros into this, costly travel by, focusing on the sustainability, what do you think, Mr. Martin? How will it affect the corporate travel? You gave us statistics, but especially for the global corporate clients, yes, maybe, but regional clients, SMEs, how would it affect those clients? What do you think?
Well, I think that, as I said, the survey that we completed, it was sort of, and that was a combination of sort of SMEs as well as big global corporates, was that, there was a sizable share that would say they would pay, as I said, up to 5% more. I think that when obviously we can't get into a conversation about pricing here, but it's,
Please don't.
But I think with what we're seeing at the moment from a pricing perspective, that's obviously a byproduct of demand outweighing supply. This wave that we're seeing at the moment in terms of revenge travel, whatever you want to call it, that's going to ease, and then we'll start to see pricing sort of start to, so this is a relatively short-term phenomenon. But again, the overwhelming sort of, or a sizable share of our corporate customers and SMEs as well were saying that they would be willing to pay a bit more. And as you said, I mean, the green surcharge that we're going to be applying, it's effectively equates to about 1% of the overall fare. So it's a nominal fee in the grand scheme of things, but then that's sufficient to help offset the emissions of that traveller.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We have probably time for just one more question, so if I can maybe ask you to pass the microphone just behind you. Thank you so much.
Dear panelists, thank you very much for your presentations. The question is the following. As you have mentioned, it's pretty challenging to inspire business enterprises to invest into sustainable practices. And from business perspective, how to entice them to start integrating sustainable practices, and if so, what kind of standards you consider to be applied, some certifications or maybe GSTT standards, something like that. Maybe my question sounds very, I don't know, sophisticated. We can divide it into different parts. Like the first one is how to motivate business enterprises in the tourism sector to do sustainable practices and get some business value out of it. And the second, please provide the examples of certifications and sustainability programs for our consideration. Thank you.
Goodness, okay, that's a fantastic question. Thank you so much. And there's a lot to that, and I'm conscious we probably haven't got too much time to do that answer justice, but I'm looking at the panelists. Anybody want to have a go at that?
I'll have a go. So I think in my business hotels, we have operating legacy hotels and we have new built hotels. So in new build hotels, it's very much looking at the LEED, working with companies like Schneider Electric, working with Arup to make sure that we're building carbon net zero properties, and we're putting the technology in place to help support and evolve that through the future. In our existing properties, it's very much taking the tools that we mentioned, ISG, Green Engage, being able to assess our usage of waste, energy, water on a monthly basis, and then start to apply, for example, recycling, reduce plastics, zero plastics. We're starting to do here in Dubai with Dubai Can and no more bottles. We're starting to do filtered water. That's becoming more commonplace. And I think how you motivate is you need to lead from the front. You need to be taking sustainability seriously. You need to be leading as a company, moving it forward, but understanding there is a transition period. So there is a transition that we have to go through, and I'll probably disagree with Julian a little bit. There is a cost attached to that, particularly when you're in traditional industries where you have owners that want to invest into their business and reinvest. So you need to be able to continue to show step by step the changes that you're making on property existing, but also make sure future you're building the hotels to be green, sustainable.
And like I say, I think I'd like to have a little bit more time to go into that, but unfortunately we are running out of time now. So I would certainly prompt yourself, so thank you so much for the question. I'd prompt each of you to come and speak to the panel afterwards and connect with us on social media, and certainly let's build into that question. And certainly, Catherine, as we continue to develop relevant topics for this marketplace and elsewhere in the globe, I think there's a lot of content, a lot of opportunity there within that question, so thank you so much. What I would say from a personal perspective, though, is, and let me begin to recap and review and give you what I promised you, which was some takeaways from this, is it's not about how you can afford to do it, it's about how you can afford not to do it. Yeah. And I've had the pleasure of sitting on a number of panels during this event and speaking with many of the exhibitors. And, this is something, the word I hear a lot is values, particularly in the leisure space, but I think it's also true in the corporate space, is people are choosing to spend their money with companies that share the same set of values as them. And increasingly people have sustainability at the heart of their values. And increasingly companies and organizations have sustainability at the heart of their values. One takeaway I'd absolutely give you is if you go on the GBTA website, gbta.org, Catherine, there is a fantastic, thank you, there is a fantastic sustainability report on there which gives you an amazing amount of information. And one of the things it talks to about is the different scopes. So scope 1 being an organization's direct activities, scope 2 being the energy that they buy in order to do what they do, and scope 3, which is the bit that I think is relevant for business travel, which is companies looking at their supply chain. It's not enough for me just to be environmentally sustainable in what I do. I need to make sure that everything I buy is also delivering to those values, and I think that's something that will really impact us in business travel. So takeaway number 1, absolutely, please go download that report. It's free of charge. Go connect with that. I also think that something we talked about a couple of weeks ago as a team was around, if we as an industry don't do this, it will be done to us. So governments will legislate and companies will force us to do this. So the question from the gentleman at Turkish Airlines, if airlines don't do this, if hotels don't do this on your own terms, you will probably be made to do it. So I think it's just really good business sense for each of us to embrace this topic. We've heard some fantastic stuff. Julian, thank you so much for that presentation. I took so much out of Julian's presentation, particularly the social justice, which we've heard mentioned by a number of the panelists. I think that's really powerful. I don't know about you, I've always wondered why everyone's so infatuated by travel. It's such a small amount. Why is the whole world bothered about travel? And why are we not bothered about everything else that we do? Well, Julian's answered that question brilliantly. If we do nothing, it'll be 25%. But actually, every industry is only a tiny piece, and everybody has to do something. And I think that's really powerful. I thought the Jevons paradox was a revelation. Thank you, Julian, for sharing that. I'd prompt everybody to take a look at that theory, drop that into meetings and conversation. I think it's a wonderful bit of theory that applies brilliantly to business travel and environment. So that's a little bit of the takeouts. I'd like to thank everybody for their contribution. Thank you for your questions. But more importantly, thank you to our wonderful panel, both virtual and in person. So if we can spend a second just giving a huge round of applause. So thank you very much.